The envelopes lay like fallen birds across the porch, white, creased, some half open, like small mouths that had been waiting to be read. I picked one up, and my fingers remembered the loop of his handwriting before my mind did. The name on the front was mine. The stamp was older than our grandson. The paper smelled faintly of salt and something floral that wasn't mine. Some stories don't just tell pain, they reveal the truth. This is one of them. Voice of Aunt. It was after the evening rain, when the air smells cleaner and the house settles into its own small sounds. I had been sitting by the window with a cup of tea that went cold because the kettle had given up its steam. My son and his wife were in the kitchen, laughing about something that had nothing to do with me. I opened the curtains to let in the light and found the porch full of envelopes, like someone had emptied a small life onto the wood. I stood there for a long breath. The letters were from him, the husband who used to write when he was away for work, the man who loved lists and little long notes with commas where everyone else put periods. I carried one inside and smoothed it against my sleeve, as if that would put it back in order. The edges were damp, but the ink held. I read the first line twice, quietly, the way you hum an old song to be sure it's still there. Mrs. Lane from next door was the one who came up the path with her umbrella. She is the kind of woman who notices everything and pretends not to. She saw the papers in my hand and called, "Margaret, are you all right?" Like she was asking about weather, nothing else. "I found them on the porch," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I felt. I wanted to say more, but the house had that way of swallowing big words. "They're his letters." She bent and helped me pick a few. Her fingers were soft and quick. "Oh dear. Had no idea there were still boxes of those," she said, and then she waited, as neighbors do, for the rest of the story. "Neither did I answered. I kept the letter pressed to my chest for a moment. It felt like a bird against my ribs. I could feel the pulse of a memory there. Him, sitting at the kitchen table, the lamp low, folding his thoughts into paper. I had kept those letters in a trunk at the foot of the bed for years, the trunk my mother left me. I thought they were safe. I thought some things are like locks. Once closed, nothing gets in or out. Mrs. Lane straightened and handed me a damp envelope that had been tucked behind a low pot. "Wind must have tossed these about when the storm came in," she said, as if wind were a reasonable thief. Her eyes slid to the house, then away. She knows how families are. She knows how secret hands can be quieter than storms. I thanked her. I wrapped the letters in a towel and put them on the kitchen table, because the kettle had already forgotten to whistle, and because I needed something sensible to do. My son came in then, rubbing his hands, still smiling, and his smile clashed with the rustle of paper. He glanced at the bundle and nodded like it was another minor thing to note. His wife, Claire, had her back to us when she spoke, arranging plates, smoothing the tablecloth with her palms as if ironing out time. "Looks like a mess," she said without turning. "I'll toss what's ruined." There was a softness to her voice that didn't reach her eyes. It caught in the way she said toss, casual, neat. It landed oddly in my chest, like an unfinished sentence. I felt a small, sharp thing in me then, not quite anger, more like cold curiosity. I took one of the letters from the towel and opened it slowly. The handwriting was the same, the little sideways loops on the G's that I had spent a lifetime recognizing. A line fell across my vision and held me there. "Come home when the gulls call, and leave the light on for me." I could almost hear the gulls in the margin, a thin, far-off sound. "Maybe we should gather them up properly," Mrs. Lane said. "Put them somewhere safe." Her words were a landing rope. I moved with them. I found a shoebox at the back of the cupboard and began to sort. Some letters were whole, some were damp and clinging. and a few had small tears along the fold, like a paper had been ripped by tentative hands. One had a perfume smudge in the corner. Not his, not mine. I folded that one last and slipped it into the box, like tucking a child in for the night. When Claire came over to the table, she reached out as if to help and then stopped, her fingers hovering. "It's silly to keep so much paper," she said lightly. "We should scan them, maybe throw the rest. These things only hold you back." She smiled the small, practiced smile people use to make hard acts look tidy. I felt the room tilt in that soft, contained way a house shifts when someone opens the wrong window. My mouth wanted to speak with truth and bluntness. But memory is a patient thing. It waits for the right shape. Instead, I folded a letter and put it in the box. Activity is a kind of argument, sometimes the only polite one we get to make. Mrs. Lane left after the rain slowed. The porch smelled of wet wood and salt. The stack of letters on my table looked like an island. I held the box for a moment, the cardboard warm where the sun had touched it through the glass. The wind had been a simple answer. It had put the letters where they would be seen. Whether hand or weather, something had made them walk back into the light. I didn't ask how they got there. The wind had already answered. The toast burned that morning in a way that made the whole kitchen smell like small apologies. I stood at the sink with my mug, watching the steam that shouldn't have been there for long, while Claire moved about with the neatness of someone who never had to worry about crumbs making a difference. Her hands were quick. She put the plates away with a sort of casual precision that says you've practiced clearing other people's rooms. "Would you like more tea?" she asked, and it sounded like an offer, not a question. Her eyes slid to the box on the table, as if reading a label she didn't care for. I said yes, because manners are a kind of map I still follow, and because my throat felt oddly full. The first months after I moved in are easy to remember the way old songs are. The chorus comes back without the verses. He had been ill before I sold the house and packed the trunk. My son wanted us closer. She said it would be good for all of us. The living room had smelled of lemon cleaner and new paint. Claire made lists folded into pockets, calendars that lived on the fridge. It was gentle at first, a kindness with edges. One afternoon, when I was rearranging a stack of photos, Claire had come up behind me and said, "Let me help with those boxes. You don't have to lift heavy things." She said it the way people say kind things, soft, with no weight behind them. I let her. I thought it would be a small mercy. I thought hands offered in help were the same hands that would keep what they touched. This morning, I moved to the foot of the bed without thinking, reaching for the trunk. The trunk was where I had always kept the letters, wrapped in a scarf with mothballs and dust. My fingers grazed the wood and found only the hollow that said someone had taken a thing without asking. The box was gone. I remember the exact hard little sound my heart made, like a coin dropped into an empty cup. Not loud, but true. I stood there long enough to think of 100 excuses, and none of them felt right. I slipped my hand into the scarf anyway, and found a stray corner of paper, damp and folded. Proof is a small, stubborn thing. "Did you move any boxes yesterday?" I called into the kitchen. My voice came out steadier than I felt. It is strange how you can ask a question that is really a shape of accusation, and it might still land as ordinary. My son called back, "No, I was at work." He does that, shields himself with schedules like armor. Claire appeared in the doorway with an apron tied, hands dusted faintly with flour. "I only cleared the closet," she said. "You told me to get rid of junk." She smiled in a way that made the sentence polite. There was no sharpness. That is always how the first lie arrives, wrapped in a good intention. I set the damp paper on the bedspread and watched it flatten into its own small map. The handwriting was a loop I could still trace blindfolded. I held it up between us and let the light through it. Her face did something like an unread book, polite and blank. "It was only getting to be too much," she said, the words smooth. "Boxes, old things. We have to think about space, think about the future." She said future like a neat, edited photograph. I wanted to tell her the future had always lived in the folded pages, in the margins where he had written jokes only I would laugh at. I wanted to tell her love sometimes lives in ink more than in plans. Instead, I made a small, strange decision. I would not make an accusation in the air. I would make a proof. I walked to the kitchen drawer where I keep the notepad and took the pen that is never far from my hand. I wrote, on a scrap, a single line. "Where are the boxes?" Not an angry line. A simple question. Then I folded it and tucked it into a place I hoped she would find. Inside the cereal box, next to where she reaches for the spoons. She found it within the hour, pretending to be surprised, then smiling in a way that was careful. "Oh, that's cute," she said, speaking to me and not quite to the note. That afternoon, she said, "I can sort those things for you. Make a list. We can digitize." She had the patience of someone arranging the world into files. I spent the day noticing small things as if they were clues. The kettle's ring in the hall, the low drawer that clicked shut, the way she always folded the towels the same way. I began to collect moments like stones, small, ordinary, and then heavy in my palm. Memory is a slow builder. It builds a case without a judge. At dusk, I opened the cupboard where the shoebox used to be and found space. Clean, presentable. It made my mouth dry to see that shelf without the familiar wisp of paper edges. I went back to the bedroom and smoothed the scrap I had tucked into the cereal box. The pen that had written the question had left a faint blue mark on my fingers. Proof sometimes leaves stains you can wash, but never quite erase. That night, my son came to bed later than usual. He kissed my forehead in the way sons do when everything seems ordinary. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to show him the damp letter I kept under my pillow like a small talisman. Instead, I watched his back until the light swallowed him and kept my hand resting on the empty space where the trunk had lived. I sold myself small bargains with silence. I told myself the boxes might come back. I told myself endings could be misplaced and not stolen. But honesty lives in paper, and in the way hands close around memory. I felt a seed of something like clarity, not sharp, but real. I would find the proof. I would make a move that left no room for polite mistakes. In the quiet before sleep, the house felt like a room with its pulse slowed. I rehearsed questions that might sound like conversation, not accusation. I lay with the damp paper under my pillow and let the looped letters press against my ribs. Somewhere near, the kettle clicked its tired rhythm, as if it, too, was waiting for an answer. The house had begun to listen in ways it hadn't before. Every sound seemed to wait a second longer, as if it was trying to decide whose side it was on. Claire's footsteps had a rhythm now. Morning. She crossed the hall twice, once to check the laundry, once to shut the guest room door that I never used. Afternoons, the small metallic click of a drawer. Evenings, a new silence where conversation should have been. I started to map those silences like they were the layout of the house itself. The air smelled faintly of polish, the kind that tries too hard to cover something. One afternoon, I went to dust the frame above the fireplace, our wedding photo. The glass had a soft fingerprint at the corner, not mine. Claire must have moved it. I remember thinking, she rearranges even what she doesn't understand. That night, I couldn't sleep. The box, the letters, the perfume on that one page. They circled in my mind like restless birds. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake my son, and went to the guest room. The moonlight sat in a square on the floor, the kind of light that doesn't lie. I lifted the pillow and slid my hand underneath. There it was, one rescued letter, folded and dry now, a little wrinkled, but still warm from where I'd kept it. I opened it slowly. The words blurred for a moment, and then came clear. You always worry about losing me, but love doesn't get lost. It just waits in quiet places. He'd written that after our first winter apart. I had cried when I'd read it back then. Now it just steadied me. Proof can be small and still mighty. The next morning, while I was trimming the dying leaves off the plant near the window, Mrs. Lane came by again. She leaned on the fence, pretending to admire the roses that hadn't bloomed since last year. Claire's been busy, she said. Saw her near the bins yesterday with a box. Looked heavy. My hands froze mid-air. What kind of box? Oh, I don't know, she said too quickly. Brown, old-looking. Then, after a beat, You still got that lovely trunk of yours? I smiled without meaning it. I did. That was all. She looked at me for a long second, the kind of look only older women give when they understand you're holding something in place that's about to crack. When she left, I sat down on the porch steps. The salt wind carried the smell of wet earth and something faintly metallic, maybe from the bins. I didn't move. My knees hurt in the way old memories do, not sharp, but deep. I thought about Claire, how she called everything sentimental clutter, how she rearranged photos, removed curtains because light should be clean, threw away the doilies because dust settles on them. Maybe she was right about dust, but she was wrong about what settles. Grief does too, and it doesn't ask permission. Later, my son came home early. He looked tired, the kind of tired that has nothing to do with work. You all right, Mum? He asked, leaning on the doorframe. I'm fine. He hesitated, eyes flicking to the shoebox on the table. Claire said you've been keeping old letters again. I met his gaze. I've been keeping what's left of my life. He nodded slowly, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just caught in the middle, the place sons often end up. When he left the room, I took out the letter from under my pillow again. I laid it flat on the table beside the cup of tea I never finished. The tea had gone cold, the kind that leaves a thin film on the surface. I touched the edge of the cup, and then the paper. Same chill. That night, I hid the letter behind the framed photo on the mantel. A different kind of safety. If she found it, at least the firelight would be witness. The next day, the house was too clean. Drawers closed tighter than usual, cushions fluffed. No stray papers. Claire hummed softly as she moved about, that low sound people make when they're trying to seem calm. I watched her from the chair, knitting nothing, just moving the needles so she'd think I was busy. When she reached the bookshelf, I noticed her glance at the frame on the mantel, the one hiding my letter. Her hand paused mid-air, then lowered. She smiled at me, polite as always. The cleaner's coming tomorrow. I'll tell her not to touch your things. My heart tapped twice too fast. There's no need, I said. She shrugged, poured herself coffee, and left a ring of it on the counter. I let it sit there, a small circle of truth in a house full of polished lies. That evening, the clock in the hallway ticked louder than usual. Maybe it was the silence around it that made it sound that way. The kind of ticking that doesn't measure time, just moments of patience. And while I sat there, with the letter safe behind the frame and the wind whispering through the thin gap in the window, I felt something new form in me. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter, heavier. A slow kind of knowing. Because sometimes the sound of a drawer closing tells you more about a person than anything they ever say. Even silence has a sound when truth sits too close. The storm rolled in from the sea that night, not with thunder, just that long, low breath the ocean takes before it remembers its power. The house went dim early. The windows rattled like they were remembering something too. I lit the lamp by the bed, not out of fear, but because silence is easier to bear when it has light sitting beside it. The letters I'd rescued were spread across the quilt, their corners weighted with teacups and a small vase so they wouldn't flutter. The air smelled of damp paper and lavender soap. Each page was a voice, still warm with the tone of a man who never rushed a sentence. I ran my fingers along the edges, as if smoothing his thoughts back into shape. One of the pages, the one I'd found half torn near the porch, had a line I'd almost missed before. The ink had bled faintly, but I could still read it. If these ever fly away, follow the wind. It knows where home is. I laughed softly, not the happy kind, more like a sound of disbelief escaping its own body. That line felt almost like instruction, as if he'd known something like this would happen, as if the letters were never meant to stay boxed forever. I sat there listening to the rain strike the roof in irregular beats. It reminded me of our first winter in that small apartment in Maine, when the rain had leaked through the kitchen ceiling and we'd set out pots to catch it. He had called it the house's way of crying. And we'd laughed, holding mugs too hot for our hands. Memory is cruel in that way. It doesn't visit with warning. It comes like weather, unavoidable and precise. After midnight, when the storm had settled into rhythm, I took a sheet of paper from my bedside drawer and began to write. My hands shook a little, not from age this time, but from something else. Resolve, maybe. The pen scratched like a whisper against fabric. I didn't write to him. I wrote to myself. If someone finds this note, know that love doesn't fade when it's forgotten. It fades when someone decides it doesn't matter. I folded the note once, then again, and slipped it inside the book Claire always reads before bed, a thin volume she keeps on the coffee table, Minimalism for a Modern Life. I wanted her to find it by accident, the way I'd found my letters, carried not by wind, but by guilt. In the morning, I watched her discover it. She was sipping her coffee, one hand on her phone, and when the note slid out, she froze for less than a second. A blink of hesitation, almost graceful. She looked up, calm, too calm, and said, "Did you write this?" Her voice had the practiced softness of someone used to stepping over their own lies. I only smiled. Maybe the house did. She set the paper down beside the sugar jar, lips curving into something polite. "You've got such a poetic mind, Margaret. I envy that." I wanted to say you don't envy it, you fear it. But words, once released, can't be called back, and I was saving mine for when they would weigh enough to matter. The day passed in a kind of fragile calm. Claire busied herself with online meetings, her voice echoing down the hall in fragments. Budget, deadline, efficiency. I stayed in the living room, folding laundry I'd already folded once. Every so often I'd glance at that book on the table, the note still peeking out slightly like a quiet heartbeat. When my son came home, she greeted him at the door with her usual careful warmth. "Your mum's been sorting through old things again," she said with a small laugh. "We really need to help her downsize." He kissed my forehead, murmured something about how I shouldn't tire myself, then disappeared into their room. I could hear them whispering. Low, urgent tones. His voice steady, hers clipped. It ended with the sound of a drawer shutting too hard. Later, when she came to clear the dinner plates, she said, "I admire how composed you are, even with all these old memories. You don't hold grudges. I wish I was like that." Composed. The word landed oddly in the air, like a compliment with bruises underneath. I smiled faintly. "Composure is just grief wearing good manners?" I said. She paused, just a blink. Then she nodded, her eyes soft with that feigned empathy people wear when they think they're winning. "That's beautiful," she said, and left the room. When the door closed, I let out the breath I hadn't known I was holding. Outside, the rain had thinned to mist. The storm was moving inland now, taking its noise with it, leaving only that hush that follows a confession no one's ready to hear. I stood by the window and looked out at the streetlight bending under the wind. My reflection stared back from the glass, tired, steady, waiting. I touched the cold pane and whispered the line again. If these ever fly away, follow the wind. It knows where home is. The glass fogged with my breath. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like hers. It felt like something had shifted back toward me, inch by inch. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would find where she kept the boxes. I would follow the wind. The next morning arrived too clean, the kind of quiet that doesn't belong to peace, but to something rearranged. The living room looked staged, almost showroom still. No letters on the side table, no photo frames slightly tilted. Even the air smelled rehearsed. Claire's kind of morning. She was in the kitchen with two of her friends, the ones who always laughed a little too loudly. I heard them before I saw them, that particular tone people use when they're trying to sound natural in someone else's house. "It's so minimal now," one of them said. "I told you," Claire's voice floated back, light and proud. "Just a little decluttering. The house feels bigger." Bigger. The word landed in my chest like a small stone. I stayed behind the doorframe, unseen, watching her gesture toward the shelves. Bare, neat, soulless. She even pointed toward the mantel, where my framed letter used to hide. The photo was still there, but flatter now, lighter. Like it had been emptied of what mattered. I wanted to ask where the weight of things goes when someone decides it's unnecessary. Maybe it lingers, unseen, in the air, like grief disguised as dust. When her friends left, I went to make tea. She was still standing by the window, scrolling through her phone. "They loved the place," she said without looking up. "I noticed," I said. She smiled. "It's so freeing to let go of the past, isn't it?" Her tone was honey, but her words were blade. I took a slow sip, the steam fogging my glasses, giving me an excuse not to meet her eyes. Freedom's only sweet if it doesn't come from stealing. She looked up then, just briefly, something flickering behind that calm exterior. "You really should rest more, Margaret," she said finally. "You imagine too much." I nodded like someone agreeing with the weather. Inside, a different silence began to gather. The kind that plans. That afternoon, when the house emptied and the tide hummed low outside, I took out my phone. I'm not clever with these things, but I know enough. I opened the gallery and scrolled back. The photos were still there, from the night I'd found the letters on the porch. Each one carefully taken, the pages spread like small wings on the damp wood. Proof that they had existed, that they had lived, and proof that someone had tried to erase them. It took only a few minutes more of curiosity, or maybe instinct, to find what I needed. I typed "antique storage trunk for sale" into the marketplace search. The fourth listing stopped me cold. There it was, the same pattern of brass corner studs, the faint scratch near the lock I remembered. My name wasn't on it anymore, but the photograph didn't lie. The seller's name was unfamiliar, but the background, that grey rug, those curtains, they belonged to this house. My pulse steadied, not raced. There's a moment when truth no longer surprises you. It just confirms what your body already knew. When my son came home that evening, I didn't speak. I waited until dinner, when the three of us sat together like a family pretending at stillness. Claire had made chicken, the kind she knows I don't eat much of, and smiled through every bite. After the plates were cleared, I walked to my room. The printer light blinked faintly in the dark, waiting like a witness. I printed the marketplace listing. Her name blurred in the corner, but the photo sharp and undeniable. When I came back, she was still at the table, scrolling through her phone. I placed the paper beside her plate and sat down. The sound of the printer ink drying was louder than the wind outside. She didn't touch the page at first. Her nails tapped once, twice, then stilled. "What's this?" she asked finally. I didn't answer. I poured myself another cup of tea, the kind of slow pour that gives silence a shape. Her eyes moved over the page. When she saw the photo, the faint colour left her cheeks. Just a flicker, but it was there. "That looks like—" she started, and then stopped. My son leaned over, curiosity soft at first, then hardening as he recognized the trunk. "Claire?" She laughed lightly, too quickly. "It's not the same one. I had an old box. I sold it. Just clutter." I looked at him, not her. That clutter was my letters, the ones your father wrote me for 30 years. He froze. The air in the room seemed to hum. Claire's smile faltered. She reached for his hand, but he didn't take it. "You've misunderstood," she said, her voice trembling now. I thought they were damaged. I didn't." I stood, calm, quiet. I slid the printed photo toward her. "You didn't throw them away. You sold them. There's a difference." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The silence stretched so long, I could hear the clock from the hallway ticking its small judgment. He rose slowly, the chair legs scraping against the floor. "Claire, tell me this isn't true." Her answer never arrived. The printer was still blinking behind me, one more light in a house full of lies. I gathered the letters I still had, the few that had escaped the wind, and placed them back in their box. The new box. A simple shoebox, but it was enough. I didn't raise my voice, didn't cry. Sometimes dignity sounds louder than anger. I turned to her, said quietly, "Paper speaks when voices tremble." Then I walked to my room, the tea still warm in my hand, and shut the door on whatever she said next. Outside, the sea wind picked up again, gentle but insistent, like it was reminding me that it still remembered where home was. The storm came again 2 nights later, heavier this time, the kind that shakes the windows like an old grudge. I was awake long before the rain started. You can always tell when a storm is coming. The air feels swollen, like it's holding its breath. I'd left the box of letters on my desk, under the lamp, half expecting the wind to find them again. When the first gust hit, one window flung open with a sharp cry, papers scattered, my husband's handwriting taking flight once more. I rose slowly, heart steady. Maybe this was his way of finishing what she had started. Maybe the wind wasn't against me. Maybe it was keeping score. I gathered what I could, holding the fragile sheets against my chest. The air smelled of salt and ink, that same old mix of grief and sea. I closed the window halfway, just enough to let the storm breathe through it. Footsteps came down the hall, quick, nervous ones. Claire appeared at the doorway in her robe, her hair unbrushed, her face pale in the lightning glow. She saw the letters on the floor, the open window, and something inside her cracked open too. "Why would you open that window?" she asked, voice shaking. "I didn't," I said. "The wind did." She stepped forward, trying to collect the papers, but one slipped between her fingers and floated, slow and deliberate, across the floor until it landed near the doorway. My son stood there, half awake, watching. He bent to pick it up, and the room fell into a silence that even the storm respected. He read the line out loud without meaning to. "Love doesn't get lost. It just waits in quiet places." His voice faltered at the last word. I could see the recognition travel across his face, the truth arriving, one heartbeat at a time. He looked from the letter to me, then to Claire, who had gone utterly still. "Is this from Dad?" he asked. I nodded once. He turned to her. "You said these were ruined." Her lips parted, but no words came. Just a sound. Small, fragile, like someone realizing too late that lies don't float. They sink. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she whispered finally. I thought she'd forget. I thought. You thought wrong, he said quietly. No anger, just disappointment. The kind that can't be fixed by tears. For a moment, all three of us just stood there. Me with the letters clutched close, him with one trembling in his hand, and her with nothing left to hold. Then he did something I didn't expect. He set the page back on the table, closed the window, and said, I'll handle this in the morning. He didn't shout. He didn't ask for explanations. He just walked past her and out into the rain, barefoot, holding the stack of damp letters against his chest. I watched him through the curtain, the streetlight spilling across his back, the storm bending around him. He didn't look back. Claire stood in the hallway long after the door shut. Her reflection in the glass was ghost-like, washed thin by lightning. She tried to speak once, then stopped. The silence between us stretched until it became something real, something permanent. I went to the kitchen, set the kettle to boil, and sat by the window. The sound of rain hitting the sill was steady now, like a metronome for the heart. I didn't feel angry anymore, just hollow, the kind of hollow that feels strangely clean. The kettle clicked off. I poured myself a cup, the warmth seeping into my fingers. Behind me, I heard her footsteps, hesitant, barefoot on the tile. She stopped at the doorway. I never meant, she began, but her voice gave up halfway. I know, I said. That's why it hurts more. She didn't reply. The house filled with the quiet hiss of rain and the slow cooling of tea. By morning, she was gone. Her side of the closet empty, her shoes missing from the mat. My son didn't come home that night. He called instead, said he'd stay with a friend, that he needed time. His voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. I walked through the house, touching each surface like a farewell. Her perfume still lingered faintly in the hallway, that same floral note I'd smelled on the first torn page. I opened every window and let the air move through freely. The wind carried in the scent of wet soil, salt, and something like forgiveness. I found one last letter on the floor near the dresser. An old one, folded and yellowed. The corner had been bent so often it nearly tore. I opened it slowly. Don't waste time defending what's already yours, it read. Love that's true will find its way back. I folded it again, pressed it to my chest, and let the window stay open. The curtains danced, the rain softened, and the house felt lighter, as if it had been waiting for this moment too. Some winds don't destroy. They return what was never theirs to carry. 3 weeks passed before the quiet began to sound like peace again. The house, for all its stillness, had learned how to breathe without her footsteps. The air felt honest, empty, but honest. Every morning I'd open the windows and let the sea wind do what it did best, clear what humans leave behind. He came one afternoon when the light was soft enough to make everything forgivable. My son stood at the gate with a small wooden box in his hands. Not the old trunk, not the shoebox, but something new, polished, simple, respectful. I met him on the porch. Neither of us said much at first. The sea behind him shimmered like something pretending to be calm. He looked older, not in his face, but in the way his shoulders carried the air. I found most of them, he said quietly. At a consignment store up the coast. Someone must have sold them forward. I bought them back. He opened the lid, and there they were, my letters, folded neatly, fragile but safe. A few missing corners, some faint stains where the ink had run, but alive. I reached for one, the paper soft under my thumb, and smiled without meaning to. He watched me, guilt heavy in his eyes. Mum, I should have seen it sooner. People only see what they're ready to believe, I said. You were trying to keep peace. So was I. He nodded, his mouth trembling around words that didn't find air. I poured us both tea, a ritual older than our arguments. We sat by the window in silence, the kettle's steam curling like the beginning of forgiveness. After a long while, he said, "She's gone to stay with her sister. I don't know if she's coming back." "I do," I said. "She won't." He didn't ask how I knew. Some truths don't need witnesses. The rain started again, soft, harmless, the kind that doesn't fall to break things, but to wash them. We sat there until the cups went cold, and he rested his hand over mine, the way he used to as a boy when he wanted to show he was sorry without saying it. Later, after he left, I carried the new box to my room. I placed it on the dresser where the old trunk used to sit. I didn't lock it. Some memories deserve air. That night, before sleeping, I opened one letter. Not to read, just to listen. The sound of paper unfolding filled the room like a heartbeat. I closed my eyes and heard him again. That steady, patient voice that always knew how to outwait storms. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It just felt lived in. I think forgiveness isn't something you decide. It's something that grows quietly when you stop defending your pain. I stayed silent, but the truth found its voice. Stories like this never fade. Voice of aunt. The next morning, the wind was gentle, and for once, every window stayed closed. The letters didn't need saving anymore. They were home,